From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende. Riding shotgun next to me as he does each and every podcast is Andre Johnson
Jr.
Do not forget the Junior. Always remember the Junior.
Please.
Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review if you are watching us on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button to get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And we are now in the month of June, Andre, and we have kind of moved into, I guess, week 3 of Saints OTAs. Yep. But we're coming off a little bit of a stretch. We didn't have a pod for a few days. I know you were feeling a little under the weather on Monday. Last Thursday, things got tied up a little bit, so we weren't able to get to a pod. But we're glad to bring you a fresh week of 3 pods this week, beginning today. How you feeling after that LSU game last night?
Man, not good. You know, LSU has a strange way of building up expectations.
Yeah.
You know, a few months ago, I was already okay with the idea that LSU really wasn't going to go far in the postseason. Then the run that they went on recently through the SEC tournament kind of made you believe, like, hold on, man. You start to make plans like, we might be hosting a super regional. You know, we might have to block off some time to go to Omaha. But unfortunately, the Tigers did lose that late lead. But you know what? The ride was fun.
The ride was fun. They turned their season around. They were able to make it interesting in the end. Came this close to winning the regional, but it was not to be. It always just goes to show for me just how hard it is to actually win it. Last year they had household names everywhere, and it took them every last ounce of them to beat Florida and win that national championship. So good season, but it's over. They look ahead to 2025. We are in 2024 when it comes to the New Orleans Saints OTAs this week. Normally, they let us see them on a Tuesday. This week, it's going to be on Wednesday, so we'll have a fresh pod as it relates to that on Wednesday. But today, wanted to go big picture with a little bit of a different topic just because we're at that time now where we've seen a little bit of the new guys. We've seen a little bit of this new version of the Saints. We got some time before we get to training camp, so you can maybe just start projecting certain things. So I really wanted to kind of take a look at some of the under-the-radar players for the Saints that may or may not be able to make an impact for the team in 2024.
Definitely. And, you know, we've talked about the household names at length on this podcast. Mm-hmm. We've talked about Derek Carr. We had a podcast about Alvin Kamara. We talked about Taysom Hill, Marshawn Lattimore, all the big-name guys. But today, like you said, we're really locking in on the under-the-radar guys, maybe the names who wouldn't first come to mind but could still make a big impact this season. For example, last year, one of those guys could have been a Carl Granderson.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree. And we're going to give our list. We each have 3 names, and it's important to point out we kind of interpreted this list a little differently. I really keyed in on under-the-radar guys that probably hardly anyone is really talking about. You key more on guys that hadn't played a whole lot, but probably know their names over the last year or two. So we both interpreted this list differently, which I think probably makes it a pretty good discussion here. So without further ado, what you think? We should get started?
Yeah, let's get started,
Sean.
Let's get started. Who's your
My number one player under the radar that could have a potential impact in 2024 is veteran wide receiver Cedric Wilson. Not getting talked about much. We talked about him when he signed, he's a player that signed a 2-year deal in the free agent market. He was the only player to sign a 2-year deal with the Saints on the free agent market. Everyone else signed a 1-year deal. And here's why I'm going with this. I just don't know if the wide receiver hierarchy is going to play out exactly the way we're kind of thinking it's going to be. I just think there's a lot of room for variance. It's a new offensive system. It's a new offensive coordinator. I think conventional wisdom says the way the season ended last year was Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry. If that is indeed the case, and that's how it goes through, and that's how it ends up happening in 2024, then great. But I don't know that is written in pen. I think that's written in pencil. I think that's a fluid situation. I think it's a flexible situation, and I think there is room for a veteran and a trust for a veteran. Got some skins on the wall. Hasn't been fantastic throughout his career, but he's been there. He's done that. He's made certain plays in certain situations. I think he's a guy that's probably he has flown under the radar, even for OTAs, even though he has caught a few passes in OTAs. And obviously, Wilson is a guy who was a little overshadowed in Miami, so his stats didn't really jump out. Although he did have 3 touchdowns a season ago. His last season in Dallas was certainly his best one. He had 45 receptions. He had decent production there. I just think this room could use an infusion of a veteran, toughness, experience, production, whatever the case may be. So you throw in a guy like EQ St. Brown, you throw in a guy like Cedric Wilson, and you got a youngster like Bub Means on top of the 3 guys I talked about, and there's a few more kind of lurking around, some undrafted free agent guys. So I think Cedric Wilson is a guy we're not talking about right now. Maybe we talk about him tomorrow. Who knows what happens at OTAs? But I think it's a guy that's got an opportunity at some point to perhaps make his mark into the rotation at the position, and maybe we're looking back saying, you know what? Saints got a pretty good deal when it came to Cedric Wilson. He's a guy for what you paid for him, for what you didn't necessarily, or what you had realistically expected from him. Perhaps he surpasses those expectations.
Definitely. I mean, Wilson had his flashes in Miami. He actually was a really good number 3 in Dallas, playing with the Cowboys. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him play a big role in New Orleans as well, potentially. Now, my number 1 guy, you talked about a room that needed something. The room that needs something the most, in my opinion, is the running back room, which leads me to Kendre Miller. Now, outside of New Orleans, a lot of people, when they think about the Saints running back room, they're going to obviously think of the guy who's been the face of it for the last few years, and that's Alvin Kamara, who's almost pushing 30, by the way.
Yeah.
You're going to think of a Jamal Williams, who just 2 years ago led the league in touchdowns. But Kendre Miller, he wasn't very consistent last year because of the injuries and inconsistent playing time, but he showed flashes. He had a game against New England where he caught 4 passes for 53 yards. He had a 31-yard catch against Chicago. Kendre Miller, by the way, who didn't get to do a lot of receiving work in college, but remember when he came here as a rookie, he specifically said, I'm coming to compete with Alvin Kamara, and I want to show that I'm not just a running back who can pound a rock, but also a guy who can be versatile, line up outside, and catch the ball as well. And in his brief time in New Orleans, I think he's done a pretty good job at showing that he's capable of doing that. Now, the Saints running backs last year, they were 21st, the 21st rushing offense in the league last season, 18th the year before that. So this running attack is definitely something that needs a little bit of life. Kendre Miller, we saw him go crazy that last game against Atlanta, 73 yards. That was the 3rd best running game of the season. Kamara had one better, and Taysom Hill had one better. So this is a Saints running game that is definitely needing a little bit of something. You've got the new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, and in that system, you know that it is really predicated around being able to run the ball. So you've got Kendre Miller, who, by the way, week 1 of OTAs, we talked about it, Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams weren't there.
Yeah.
It was Kendre Miller that got to take a lot of the first team reps. And then Jamal Williams comes back last week. Alvin Kamara still not there. Will we see Kamara tomorrow at OTAs? Maybe, but I think it'll still be Kendre Miller that's going to be taking a lot of those, touches so far in OTAs. We'll see how minicamp goes next week. But Kendre Miller, I think, with the ages of Alvin Kamara, the aging of Jamal Williams, there is a window for Kendre Miller to step in and affect this running game in a way that we haven't seen it affected in a while.
I completely agree. In fact, I said a couple weeks ago, I think that this he has a chance to lead the team in rushing. I mean, if you really think about what Kamara does well and what Kendre does well in pure rushing yards, I think Kendre Miller has the opportunity to lead the team in rushing. That's the only reason why I didn't put him on that list is because I didn't feel like he felt completely, quote unquote, under the radar. But he's a guy that didn't necessarily contribute a whole lot last year. I think you would expect a reasonable jump, obviously, in year 2. So that's your number 1. My number 2 guy. This is probably the last time I can talk about him and still have him qualifies under the radar. Dallin Holker. And I hate going this way with an undrafted free agent because there's always such a long mountain to climb. But in Dallin Holker's case, I like what I'm seeing on the football field. B, he's getting first-team reps, and he's a guy, he seems to know where he's at, know what he has to do. He's got confidence. He's got competence. He's comprehending things. And the team clearly valued him with the guaranteed money that they gave him in the undrafted rookie pool. That's part 1. Part 2 is this offense values tight ends so much, even more so than any other offense, with the way they use 2 tight end sets, with where they line these guys up, with the way they draw up plays and certain route concepts to dictate certain matchups. If he can certainly provide that for this team, I think he doesn't just make the team. I think he has a chance to contribute on this team. And I don't like going there with an undrafted free agent because the odds of them making the roster aren't always great. But what really stands out, what's in front of him? What's really stopping him at this tight end position? That's probably what stands out most. It's just how thin it actually is. There's Juwan Johnson. There's Taysom Hill. There's Foster Moreau. We know Juwan Johnson can be the pass-catching tight end. We know Foster Moreau is sort of an inline blocking type, H-back type. And we know Taysom Hill is certainly the guy that can do it all. And he's certainly done it all through OTAs now in the first couple of practices. So what's really stopping Dallin Holker from not just making the roster, but being on the roster in key situations, unless they add some kind of veteran after late cuts in late August? I just don't see what's standing in Dallin Holker's way. So yeah, I think even as an undrafted free agent who's only had 9 practices, I see his competence on the football field. I see why they like him, and I see a thin depth chart that, to me, leads to the opportunity for Holker to surpass any sort of expectation you would have for him. Because an undrafted free agent is just making the team. I think he can make the team plus and maybe contribute in a fairly significant way as an undrafted free agent.
Right, and it's important to note that Dallin Holker, after Brock Bowers last year, he was second in the I think it's the John Mackey Award for the nation's best tight end. He came in second place right after Brock Bowers, who's supposed to be generational. So Dallin Holker had a solid senior season last year. The Saints tight ends last year, not counting Taysom because he plays a little bit of everywhere, they had the 7th fewest yards from the tight end position. Yeah. So the gap is there. The area for him to make an impact is there. So I like the Dallin Holker pick. My second rounder. If you're really locked into Saints circles, you know this guy, but I promise you a lot of people outside of New Orleans are not thinking about this name, and that's Isaiah Foskey. When I talked about Kendre Miller, I really was thinking down the line and what he could be for the season. But for Foskey, I'm thinking right now. Yeah. Because right now, as we stand here on June 3rd, Cam Jordan is not practicing. Tano Passanio is not practicing. Chase Young is not practicing. So that pass rusher spot that we said was so deep a few weeks ago, it's not very deep right now. No. You've got Isaiah Foskey, you've got Peyton Turner, and you've got Carl Granderson. If there is anybody who has an opportunity to stand out and show this team why they just picked him last season with a 2nd-round draft pick, it's Isaiah Foskey. I think the explosiveness is still there. The team clearly loved him. That's why they drafted him that high. And I think he can potentially set himself up with a good mini camp, a good training camp. Because, by the way, we don't know if these guys will be back for training camp. We know Tano won't be. Right. We're not sure about Chase Young. He probably won't be. Maybe Cam Jordan is, but you could set yourself up potentially with a good mini camp, a good training camp, and if you burst out in the preseason, Isaiah Foskey could really work his way into some playing time at one of those pass rusher spots, because Cam Jordan last season, he wasn't exactly the Cam Jordan that we were used to seeing. Carl Granderson was really good. Chase Young, you bring him in, you pay him $10 million, but he's had injury concerns in the past, and we're not exactly sure where he'll be by that point in the season. So Isaiah Foskey, the least that he can do, he can make that decision of who to start at pass rusher very difficult for you coming up in these next 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, and the thing with him was when you looked at the initial depth chart, there was a lot to sort through. There was a lot of bodies to sort through. A lot of avenues he has to navigate to get to the top or to get to where he is to get on the field. Now all of a sudden, Young steps aside, Jordan steps aside, Tano's got the injury. Now all of a sudden, those first team reps have got to go to somebody. If you don't take advantage of this, shame on you, Isaiah Foskey. And make no mistake about it, this organization has not given up on him. They invested a lot in him. They want him to work out. So there's your opportunity. I know it's early in the OTAs, and by the time the season comes around, who knows what could happen. But if you start making an impression now into minicamp, into training camp, then you got yourself a spot, at least in the rotation. Now, I think the expectations for Foskey at some point is to be a premier starting defensive end. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I do think you can get back on the radar and maybe kind of jumpstart your career a little bit in the second year. So I like Foskey. All right, number 3 for me. Again, I focus more on under the radar as opposed to maybe, where they could ultimately end up. Will Harris is a guy is a versatile DB. They signed a little bit later in the process. The secondary for the Saints is sound. But this is a guy that can contribute in a lot of ways. He had a down year last year in Detroit, really got phased out in their secondary, played more special teams where he became kind of a guy they leaned on in that regard. But he's played the outside, he's played nickel, he's played free safety, he's played in the box, and he's played special teams. I think that kind of versatility, and you look at the snaps, it's a legitimate amount of snaps in each spot. It's not like 1 or 2 snaps here, 800 over there. You know, he's been spread out over his 5-year career or 4-year career in Detroit. And obviously, the longevity of a season, the length of a season, with the way DA values DBs and the way he loves versatility back there to mix and match certain personnel groupings in certain situations. I don't know where the ceiling is when you brought in a guy like Will Harris. I would imagine it was probably key special teams guy. He can contribute in the secondary. But if he can show versatility and given that they've had some injuries back there really every single season, I think Will Harris is a guy, bang for your buck, might be a really good deal by the end of the season, just given what he can do, what he can add. And don't discount the fact we kind of gloss over special teams, but a guy that's that good or that reliable on special teams can really make a difference in your team. And again, big picture, that you're looking for any avenue possible to just get a little bit better from a season ago. Special teams coverage could certainly be one of those avenues. So Will Harris to me is a guy no one's talking about, no one will talk about, but I think if he can make his way onto the roster, I think he can find his way to contribute just because of what he gives you from a versatility standpoint. And I think DA values that, and I think DA is smart enough to use that versatility if he can show it on the field.
Definitely, and versatility is the word when I think about Will Harris. The ability to play cornerback, the ability to play safety. Obviously, you want everybody to stay healthy, but injuries will inevitably come up throughout the season. And if somebody goes down at corner, if somebody goes down at safety, if, say, Jordan Howden, who's kind of been penciled into that strong safety spot, if he's not ready to play, Will Harris is a guy you can plug in. So I really like the Will Harris pick. My last guy comes on a unit that we said has been the weakest for the Saints, and it's that offensive line. And there's probably a couple names that you could go on that offensive line, but the name I went is Nick Saldiveri. He's a rookie that they drafted last year, I believe, in the 5th round. Battled injuries at times. At other times, he was kind of a healthy scratch. Only played in 4 games, tallied up about 18 snaps. But what was interesting to me is knowing that, and even after the signing of Lucas Patrick, who's a veteran left guard, when OTA started, it was Nick Saldiveri who was in that starting first unit. And it seems that the team, despite not playing him very much last year for whatever reason, to kind of moving him to the inside at that guard position last season, it seems like the team is really sold, or maybe not sold, but they're definitely giving him an opportunity.
That's what it is.
To show that, hey, this is an offensive line where there is an opportunity to play, because we've got Cesar Ruiz on the other side. We've got Eric McCoy in the middle, but that left guard spot between you, Nick Saldiveri, between
Shane Lemieux, and then Lucas Patrick.
Lucas Patrick, the guy they brought in from Minnesota, there's an opportunity for him to, Ali Udo, that's the guy I was thinking about. There's an opportunity for him to step up and really earn some playing time, and it's needed because this offensive line was arguably the weakest unit from last year. It was the weakest unit throughout the offseason. It could be your weakest unit going into the regular season. So if a guy that you picked in the 5th round last year can step up and make an impact, it would definitely be good.
And look, he would have earned it because he would have had to go through a lot of veterans, and he's not getting the Trevor Penning treatment where they want Trevor Penning to win the right tackle job. Yeah. I think they would like Saldiveri to be a starting left guard if that's certainly possible. But they're not going with that with the idea that he's got to win it. I think if he were to win that job, it would be because he really battled, beat out some veterans. Now, I still ultimately think you got that guy you can lean on in Lucas Patrick or even a Shane Lemieux at that left guard spot if Saldiveri is not up to the task. But I do think it does say something that he was available. He took all the first-team reps at left guard when we saw him last week. The week before that, he split the first-team reps with Shane Lemieux. So I think Saldiveri certainly has an opportunity to ultimately compete for that starting left guard spot. I will say this, though. If he's not up to the challenge, they will pull him because it's too big. It's too big of a spot. It's too important of a spot, and it's too critical to the entire season to not have that unit working in cohesion. So
And at the end of the day, he is a 5th-round pick. Like you mentioned with Trevor Penning, he's a 1st-rounder.
Yeah, right.
Or a 4th-round
Fourth
pick.
round pick, yeah.
4th-round pick. Trevor Penning was a 1st-rounder. You almost need him to work out. If a 4th-rounder, for whatever reason, doesn't work, it's not the biggest thing in the world.
Right, and but they still want it to work because I think they love the idea of building depth in the middle rounds of that draft. So it's interesting. You had 3 second-year guys. I had 3 newcomers, 1 undrafted free agent, 2 veteran free agents. I had 1 honorable mention. Again, this is more on the under the radar spot just because of the position he plays. Christian Boyd, the 6th-round pick out of Northern Iowa, kind of getting a few reps here and there, making a few plays here and there. There's no pads on, obviously, but you look at the way that defensive tackle position is kind of stacked up right now. There might be a spot for a guy like him to get into the rotation as that 4th D tackle. Again, it's a 6th-round pick from a small school. If he can give you anything in year 1, I think that would surpass the realistic expectations for a player like that. So Christian Boyd was an honorable mention. Did you have another honorable mention?
My honorable mention, and the reason I didn't say him is because I ultimately decided he's probably not under the radar, but the one name that I was thinking about was Willie Gay Jr. Willie Gay Jr. being the linebacker that they signed and a really big part of stopping mobile quarterbacks for the Saints this year,
and he was their first free agent. I think you're right. That may surpass the quote unquote under the radar description. All right, so this week, tomorrow, Wednesday, we'll be at Saints OTAs. We'll have another pod to give you all the updates: who's in, who's out, who played well, who didn't play well, who's excelling, any new wrinkles with the new Saints offense that they throw out at us. We'll certainly look at that. So it should be a good day, a good week up ahead.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. We've got this last week of OTAs, and then after that, mandatory minicamp where hopefully we will see everybody who's on the Saints roster.
Hopefully
there are
so.
a few names still missing.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, so I think we're good for today. Anything else for us?
No, I'm good.
All right, Andre Johnson Jr. is good. I am good. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.